Mr. Justin Podur, my old nemesis. How are you?
It seems our skills are evenly matched.
I
Yeah.
don't get it. I don't what.
I don't know. I thought you were doing my old nemesis, so I was thinking like some kind of Western, or I guess more like an Eastern, like where two samurai start fighting with swords and then they realize they're evenly matched and then they start trying to figure out, how who is your teacher, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, when Michelle Yeoh and Zhang Ziyi are fighting. Michelle Yeoh keeps asking her who her teacher was because the style was distinctive.
Justin, nobody saw that movie in 15 years. Nobody cares about Crouching Tiger. They have a new version of
I
it.
saw it in the theater. I got there late. They had to usher me in. It was some kind of film
Do you remember we saw a
festival.
movie in the theater that was awesome?
Yeah, also a Chinese movie. It seems Chinese movies are what seem to come up when we
Let's go
chat,
see a
Sina.
Chinese movie. But there's not. Is there any in Toronto we can watch?
I don't know. Because of the China. You were on my show to talk about the China panic. I don't know if that's affected our ability to watch Chinese movies
Yeah,
yet.
it has. Also, people just don't go to the movie theater anymore. Movies are dead.
Yeah, COVID killed them, but I guess they were dying before that. Streaming services, COVID.
Justin, we're supposed to be
Yeah.
doing a bonus episode. This is a bonus episode. I regret to inform you that I would like you to tell people why you signed up for the bonus feed years ago and you still support me.
I support you because when I go on the internet and look for things, I look for things that are different, like that don't just sound like everything else. So that was what I thought. I thought your Twitter was very funny, and then I was listening to, you know what? It was it's something you don't do very much anymore, but I remember listening to you and Louis all day. That was the very first episode that I listened to, was you and Louis all day, and you guys were talking about all kinds of things, but at one point you went on a rant about Hamid Dabashi,
Oh, yeah.
and I had just read something about Hamid Dabashi that had enraged me. Had
His
absolutely
introduction, was
enraged
it the
me.
introduction to his latest book where he talks about black and brown children playing together or something? Some weirdest
No,
thing in the
no, it was
world?
something about how Iranians are inherently racist. Like basically how Iranians are inherently racist, and Iran means our Aryan and they're all about the Aryan race. So it was trying to kind of conflate like people from Central Asia with Nazis, just like in a very casual footnotey kind of way. And I was just like, this is some of the stupidest rat, cowardly stuff I've read in a long time. And then just as I was reading that, you and Louis started were playing in the background, and you started ranting about Hamid Dabashi, and I thought, okay, well, this is, you have my attention now. I'm gonna, whatever it is that I have to do to support this project, I'm gonna have to do. And so, I started following Louis all day, looking you up. I think I got in touch over Twitter. I don't know. I think that was how it all
It's
started.
true. And it's been a beautiful friendship. And I appreciate all your insights. And you taught me so much. I read your books. Uh, I'm so happy that we met online.
But they say you shouldn't be negative, but that's not really true, right? It was actually your negativity and your, like you had a
I'm a hater.
negativity. Yeah, it was your hater. It was the hatred directed at appropriate targets, because I suppose everybody's a hater in some way. So the question is really, do you hate things that are really hateful? Or do you hate things that are completely innocent and minding their own business? And so that's, yeah,
So this is
that's,
so this is actually kind of related to why I needed you
oh,
to come
okay.
on the show today. Well, first of all, thank you for promoting the Patreon, for doing that.
Yeah.
This is going to go on the main feed, at least this part of it. But I'm going to ask people if they could sign up for my show, my Patreon. I've lost a little bit last few months, so
Oh
anybody out
yeah.
there
This
who's
is
got a lot of
this is
money to
the
throw around, I'm your
podcasting
boy.
is podcasting is the definition of an elastic demand, right? When people have any kind of pinch on any other kind of expense, all of which are going up. I suppose people
It's true.
quit
It's
their
true.
Patreon first.
It's hard for me to ask people directly to like give me money. I know you're supposed to, unless like the internet, and there's nothing wrong with asking for, but I have this like stupid petty bourgeois thing inside of me that thinks it's like above me to like ask or like beneath me or something. I don't know. So I just don't, and I just kind of do it by osmosis. Like I try to let market forces reign. So I give a preview of the show. If people want to sign up, they can sign up. Like, and sometimes I'll go 3-4 weeks without posting any show to any feed. So sorry, but at the same time, like there's still enough content in front and behind the paywall that $5 a month is not that much, and it's good content.
Well, yeah, that I mean, I think you ultimately the only reliable way to get people to be patrons is to cut them off from some percentage of the material.
Yeah. Well, you're very kind with your show. You have 0 paywalls.
Well,
Which
I
is
have
nice.
0 paywalls, but I have a job. So while I
true.
have a job, I will continue.
Universities are the greatest paywall of all time.
Well, exactly. People, and I do this at your too with my classes. I try not to assign textbooks that they have to buy, because they're already paying tuition. They're paying the subscription fees for the library materials that the library then pays these journal companies all this money. So we might as well use it. No, people shouldn't pay twice. And in that sense, all the research that I do for whatever shows is funded already once. Right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
I do.
I mean, that's a good way for academics to think about their work. Is that you've already gotten a big grant from your students.
Yeah, exactly. It's funded once, so everything we do have that. In my view, we have an obligation to publish our work, to put it out there, because of that.
Well, so this is kind of related because this is my periodic foray into the land of a very interesting and wonderful land called existential crisis.
And Gabriel, you didn't get Gabriel Rockhill for this therapy session?
No. This is a deeper kind of therapy.
I listened to one of your therapy sessions before. That was good.
That was therapy. It was. It's funny.
He was so calm. He was so like, well, Sina.
Gabriel has your energy too. Like, you guys are good teachers. I don't feel like I'm a good teacher. Like, I don't have like the teacher in me because I'm like impatient and ADD and like, why aren't you getting this, you stupid students? Like, I would never say that, but like in my heart, I sometimes feel that way. Whereas you're very like avuncular. You're like welcoming. Like, it's just your vibe. Also, it's how you run your show too. Like, it's just your personality is more like, you're like everybody's dad. That's kind of like you're like responsible.
I just have to, but I do have to restrain myself. Like I do envy people like you and the old version of filter. You, who can just get into fights, online and just trash people, and it's very enjoyable.
I don't do that anymore. Well,
I know
actually, this is part of the episode. Well, it's not about my stupid social media or my personality. Yeah. It's more to do with the fact that I'm trying to, for the last year or so, and maybe a little bit longer, I've been trying to come up with like a new, I've been trying to come up with like a new way of manufacturing my worldview every day. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Every day you wake up, you're like this. Like, you have to think about it from like the individuated perspective. You're like this single person. You're raised in whatever part of the world at whatever time in history. You have these inputs: education, culture, your parents, social whatever, all these different things, and you come out this kind of gebildet subject, educated subject. If you go through the system, this is the liberal Enlightenment fantasy, sure, but at the end of the day, it's on you to determine like what ethical boundaries do you draw, and when say other people cross them. Yeah. Not just in your own life, but in the sense of like what political crises get your attention. What are the things that drive your sense of, oh, this thing right here, this little corner of the Guernica map we call world history unfolding every day, which is like a metaphor I like to reach to often. that like, oh, this corner right here is extremely important and you have to look at this corner, and all those other acts of violence that go on every day and that go unnoticed and unmarked and unmourned, all those people who don't get the benefits of this media apparatus or like solidarity, whatever you want to call, they just go, their lives go, unmourned, and or they're mourned, it's mourned by, and I think this is how most of the world works. And the thing we call the news cycle actually plays a critical role in solving that problem for us, right? That logical problem, which is like, why is that violence there so unspeakable? And where is the other violence that you didn't hear about, that you'll never hear about, going on all over the world every day? Like why does that elude your purview? And like, what is it about that violence that like didn't get your attention, right? Like, and what does it mean to be this like ethical consumer of the news that you and I try to be? Me less so these days. I envy your ability to do it. You have this almost like workman-like approach to everything. Like, it's the way I don't know what you're gonna do after your Civ podcast ends, because you just like, what are you gonna do? Like, because you have this very kind of linear way. You're like, okay, working our way through, and it's very good, and it's very easy. You don't fuss like us humanities people who are like, oh my god, the hermeneutics of the blah blah blah. It's not. You just are like, here's a straight line. Let's go from here to there,
and
like
from here to there.
It's kind of, it's kind of how you write too.
That's from episode to episode, and it's also within each episode. That's the same thing we do. Within each episode, we do a chronology of whatever it is that we're talking about.
I mean, and that chronological approach is not apolitical either, right? It's a modern,
no, of course not.
Like, it's our own. It's how we've been trained. It's how we kind of hold history in our heads along these kind of. They actually look plotted. That's the thing. Like, this is where I feel. I feel like my own training as a literary person. So like this is so like part of the problem is I feel, and this is the literary person in me, is that we try to write novels out of the political events of our world, especially in other countries. Like, the language we have for them is novelistic. It's like Les Miserables. Like, it's like mixed with this like high Europe, like 19th century romance. Like, our idea of like what revolutions look like is so profoundly determined by like 19th century French literature and like British literature and the cliches that have like stemmed.
Well, I taught myself how to write fiction, so I took a bunch of these courses, and all the courses are the same. And they all go back to like either Aristotle's Poetics or Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces, or
oh god, not Joseph Campbell.
Yeah, so it's like there's a hero or a Lagos Edri drama, something about the structure of drama. So the idea is like there's always a hero, there's a main character, the main character has something wrong, some flaw, some misbelief. And then they go through these experiences and they have some insight, and at the end there's something that they know that they didn't know at the beginning, and that's also something the audience readership didn't know at the beginning that they know, or depending on what kind of character it is, right? Like, if it's Sherlock Holmes, he's a little bit ahead of the reader. If it's like you're creating this frustrating irony, the reader is like, why didn't you get this? Why don't you get this? And that's part of the emotional payoff, right? Is the reader could be ahead of the character. But in all cases, we map that onto contemporary politics, and then there's a lot more that's known and talked about how fiction works now than definitely 20 years ago. So it's like there's a lot of this like, stop imagining America as the main character or the protagonist, or stop America's not the main character. America's the villain in this story and not the hero. So even, I guess what I'm saying is there's a way that people read heroic journeys and fictional structures onto politics that just determines the way they analyze everything. And
yeah, absolutely. No, and like that novelistic form, like what you described earlier in terms of Joseph Campbell. Actually, my dream book, which I will never write because of aforementioned diseases mentioned, uh, aforementioned diseases, the is a kind of is partly a takedown of like Star Wars and Joseph Campbell, in the
Yeah,
sense
yeah,
that like Joseph Campbell was this like preeminent charlatan who
yeah.
like
That's what
took
show.
like this completely made up formalistic
Yeah,
structure that he borrowed from like various people and like dumbed it down even further. And
yeah,
those models are like pretty dumb to begin with, because
yeah,
there's
yeah,
so much like telegraphing. Actually, it's related to the problem I'm bringing up today. You read, I mean, how many novels can a single human read and map? It's impossible,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
it's you're not able to hold the world in your brain. The world is way too big. You're
yeah,
not even able to hold countries in your brain or
yeah,
national traditions. You can just pretend to, and
yeah.
you can just try to, and you can do more than others. So, like a British literary expert is not an expert on all of British literature. That would be impossible. They're an
Right,
expert relative to the population
right.
of
Yeah,
non-British of non-experts. So like that model, I feel, though, is that like that model of the intellectual, right, is to sort of train yourself in this thing called a field and then apply that training in the problems that you manifest, that you see manifest in texts and like new occurrences, right? And like that's the same problem of like political studies or like political science. It's the same fundamental problem, right? Like the world, I believe, we read it textually. Like we see the events, say in like last night, what happened in Janine, right? Like it's textual reading for us. For us in our part of the world and how we receive it, it's a textual event, and so we apply the logic of our reading to it, right? Like it's there's no you know there's so much fiction out there that rests on this like very tenuous connection that like, oh, I'm representing the world, I'm representing reality, but like that correspondence to reality is funny because the reality you think you're corresponding to is always already fictional. Like it's you
yeah.
that you fictionalized it in your
Right,
mind. God,
right.
listen to me, always already fictional. Get that out of my brain. Get that out of
Sorry,
my
sorry.
get that stuff out of my brain.
I apologize on behalf of all listeners, I apologize to all listeners that you had to listen to that thing.
Déjà toujours.
We will.
Or is it toujours déjà? I forget. So like I feel that like that's like a logical problem we have, and that sort of like expand to so many other realms where the reality we manufacture of other places, capital O, capital P, like is so baked into our is so like baked into our imperialist worldviews that we inherit here, that we build, right? Such that the violence that occurs every day in Canada against all kinds of people in police custody, other and not in non-police custody, whatever, that stuff is all written off as like, oh, the daily fare of neoliberalism, right? But someone dies in custody in Iran and you lose your mind, right? Like
Yeah.
we're told like
And
this is a
politicians
yeah.
and Canadian politicians go on the media to denounce things happening in Iran. When what I love, speaking of this, the news, which I also don't exactly, and never people are deceived that when they think that I do follow it, I don't. I treat it like a research project, so I will not follow something for a long time, and then I'll get into it and I'll go back on Factiva or a database and I'll search on that topic and read back 6 months or a year about it, just in one go, to do some piece of writing or some piece of research on it. So I don't follow things. I don't follow a lot of things. There are a few things I follow on an ongoing basis, but not. I'm not a news hound who follows out, who reads it. I don't even read a daily newspaper. I never have, and since I was a teenager. So
I mean, I'm curious about that. You never were. It never. You just read online, like different websites.
Yeah. Well, I was an editor for ZNet for a long time, so it's funny because being an editor at a kind of a left-wing news and analysis site makes you very passive. You don't have to go looking for anything. People send stuff to us and we accept and reject it based almost entirely on a political test, right? Like we don't really care. if you have the same values as us, we didn't really have like a lot of like, oh, we don't like this writing or we don't like this literary, style. We didn't really care about that, right? So it was much more about like the politics, and then we would post what came. And by the time you read, we spent as a volunteer editor, I was still spending a couple hours a day reading these things. And by the time you get through what everybody's sending you, you get a pretty good sense of what's going on. But that, and I also didn't have time to do anything else. I didn't have time to read the New York Times. I remember talking to somebody about how they read the New York Times every day, back in like 2003. And I was like, oh my God, I can't imagine reading the New York Times every day. Like it would, how could you not absorb that into your worldview? And sure enough, like the person that I had that argument with, who was, an anti-imperialist in 2003, is a complete neocon now. I don't think it was a coincidence that he thought it was really important as a left-winger to read the New York Times every day to know what the mainstream debate was. It's like, you think you're so smart that you can read that every day and not absorb their worldview, but nobody is that smart and nobody is that strong. That seeps into your worldview. There's no way it can't. There's no way it doesn't.
That's the thing. Like, our worldview is the text we read. Like that's the fundamental sort of like position you have to start with, is that like we don't have some sort of, like, you and I who both run podcasts, very good podcasts, which you should all subscribe to and listen to. But like we don't have any monopoly on some kind of worldview. All we do is pursue our interests. Our interests are variegated, mind you. Yeah. Like your show, you do a lot on South Asia, obviously, for your own reasons, and I do a lot of stuff on God knows what, on Charles Dickens for some reason. But like it's how we decide the nature of our content. Right. is itself very political, and you have to be honest about that choice. You have to examine it and think about that, which is a big reason why, say, I haven't done an episode on Libya. I mean, I'm doing one literally tomorrow. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow actually. Like I've avoided Libya partly because what I have to say about Libya is not very friendly to Muammar Gaddafi. But
interesting. Okay.
Partly, and it has to do with how his death and how he's like ascended into this realm of like anti-imperialist martyrs, when in fact the guy signed his own death certificate. He let the executioners walk into his house. He gave them the like axe that they were going to chop off his head with. Like,
that's
to
always
me,
how it is. I mean,
that's not always how it is. Like, well, it's actually, this is I'm giving you a preview of tomorrow's episode, which is with Matteo, and we talked about it already. And it's like a literary problem. Like, how do you examine the plot of this guy's life, like Muammar Gaddafi? How do you examine his life when you know how it ends? Like, how do you not assess? And so, like, we have like a spoiler alert problem on that episode.
But you have to be careful too, Sina, because the eternal problem from my perspective, not so much in terms of what I read, because what you read is one thing. That's one side. The other side is like what you know to be true and don't either emphasize or talk about much. Like, I studied Colombia for a long time. And the guerrillas in Colombia, the FARC, they did a lot of wrong things, like a lot of wrong things strategically, a lot of wrong things morally. But like, I never talk about that because I don't want to empower, like, whatever they do wrong, I don't want to empower their opponents, and I don't want to associate myself with their opponents. Do you know what I mean? So, like, this is always a problem with the Gaddafis or the Aristides or the FARCs or even the Chavez.
Or the Islamic Republics.
Or the Islamic Republics. Exactly. And so, like, I wouldn't want to. I don't know if I'm going to listen to that one of yours. I'm like, because I'm like, of course, Gaddafi, like, Gaddafi, is there a world where Gaddafi survives by making better strategic calls? I think so. I think Gaddafi made some really bad calls, of course, and I do think that is what Saddam Hussein. But like, the bad calls of the Gaddafis of the world are the one thing that you can guarantee you're gonna get everywhere. You don't need to go to the East as a podcast to hear that Gaddafi was, screwed up. You can hear that everywhere, right?
It's more, I guess, in the case of Gaddafi, and I'll get into that. I'll do this with Mateo tomorrow, because that's how that's how I'm framing the episode for myself. I'm hoping that, and this is
Yeah.
where the dialectical nature of a podcast, which
Yeah.
is nice actually, which is like liberating.
Yeah.
This is where it comes in, because your interlocutor comes in and says, "No, wait,
Yeah.
okay. While what you may be saying makes sense on some level, consider it
Yeah.
like this." And like
Yeah.
this is the best part of being an academic,
Yeah.
right? Is that you have this room to discourse, and if you're good at it, if you find people who are complementary, not necessarily ideologically, but who are complementary to how you think and how they engage you, much
Yeah.
like our conversations have been over the years, then
Yeah.
you find yourself in that like very productive dialectical process of thesis, antithesis,
Yeah.
synthesis. Now that's if it works out, right? Like if I that's if it works
Yeah.
out. If I go and interview some like hated, like boring Iranian regime changers, we're not going to get anywhere. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe
you'll just shout at each
maybe.
other. And,
I honestly, I wouldn't even shout. I would actually, like in those instances, I'm actually people. People don't know this about me because I don't have many confrontational episodes. But
Right.
I'm actually not very confrontational most of the time. I
Right.
actually am like more passive and submissive, and
Yeah.
I'm more interested when people who are like arguing against me. I'm more interested in like, okay, lad, let's have it out. Let's hear what you
Yeah.
have to say, because it might move the needle a little bit for me, and I'm excited to like have my view challenged. But that's a little bit separate than what I'm talking to, because that's like the like problems of a media guy, right? Like how
Yeah.
like that's like we are media guys at the same time as we're textual consumers and like news
Yeah.
watchers. These are like three different tasks that in our cases have been fused together, right?
So-
Because the content of our media guy work is from the reading and the news cycle, right? It's the combination thereof. Because our guests are also on the news cycle, and we often use them. So, for instance, Imran Khan, he's almost assassinated,
Yeah.
lots of news, and
Yeah.
it's on you, someone who knows the people who know the situation, at least better than you and better than your listeners. You made that connection, and you
Yeah.
open the door, and that person brings in perspectives that otherwise you wouldn't hear. That's when the system works. Like I love when
Right.
that happens, right? But it's the problem I'm in now, that 5 years into my show, I find myself like exhausted by the news, like emotionally, like just last night. It's so insane watching Palestinians destroy 7 like massive like Zionist like military machine trucks, whatever transport, one of them called a Panther. Like that video, I watched it for like an hour, different context. Like I consume that story for an hour. Like
Yeah.
lots of other things happened in the world, but it was my
Right.
choice to consume that, to like look at that,
Right.
to see what people's responses were, to learn from that. So like
Right.
that itself is a politicized choice, which I don't think is a bad thing. Like it's
Right.
not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just how the brain and the human mind works. I couldn't sit yesterday and like, well, also ISIS killed a bunch of people in Uganda just coincidentally after, was it Uganda? Yeah, just coincidentally after they announced a break with the dollar. Gee, I'm sure that was a coincidence. But like,
Right.
this is like, I didn't study that. I don't follow this. I mean, I have Telegram channels. God bless Telegram. It's both a blessing and a curse. But ultimately, my brain goes towards things that have already been treaded in my mind. Like there's already, to use like an imperialist metaphor, like I've cut that path to that so-called nowhere land, and it's someplace that I'm like, I know the towns of the name, I know the names of the towns in Palestine. Like I
Yeah.
know the different alliances, I know the different military packages. Like my own investment and time and
Yeah.
study has paid off in a sense that I can recognize when things are happening. And partly this is what people pay me to do. This is why the content of my show is what it is. And the people who support my show, God bless you all who are listening right now. Mwah, I love you. I don't thank you enough. But like that's what they come for, and they come for the guests, and they come for, so like this is not like, I'm not sitting here being like, oh my god, we have a unique problem. Like we're part of an information economy. We're like a key part of it. These days it seems like a lot of us are a key part of it, because the podcast sphere and the YouTube sphere feeds so much in the broader spheres outside of it. But like it's the ethical problem that's bugging me, which is like, why do I view certain places and not other places? And how do can you reconcile that? Can I be more, let's say, holistic or global, if you want to be 2000s kind of way? Or do I just do what I do and let other people do what they do, which is probably much of the same? Like, very few people are global. I mean, this is why Ben Norton is actually amazing. Guys like Ben.
Yeah.
Ben is always on top of things. And yeah, okay, whatever. You're going to be wrong about stuff. I'm sure if I chase down every single thing Ben said, but ultimately, like that attempt to sort of keep present is extremely hard. They're extremely hard. And guys like Ben, they do it very well, almost like casually. And it's impressive. And you kind of do it too. To a lesser extent, because you don't publish as much as Ben, but you're pretty global in your world, way more than me, I would say.
Well,
is that a more ethical stand? Is that that's my question?
No, I don't think so. I think all anybody can do is what they do. I really don't think there's any better way to be than the way that you are. Like but here's an interesting disconnect. We can talk kind of concretely. I think we've talked every time we do one of these check-ins. I think this issue comes up, especially this past year. Yeah, which is like my consumption, my news consumption, and my output are completely disconnected. They've never been more disconnected than they have this year, because Russia. I'm most of what I'm paying attention to in terms as a consumer is Russia, Ukraine, and I've produced almost nothing about it because I continue to say, like, for whatever like, here's rather than telling you what I think.
I know where this is going, and I was thinking about the same thing too. Yeah, like it's not our place. It's not our place to talk about Russia.
I'll just tell you a little story, which is like when the African delegation went to Ukraine. They went to Ukraine, then they went to Russia. And in Russia, Putin told them, look, like, I appreciate what you guys are trying to do here, but we tried. And he showed them that document and how close they came and how the Americans kind of...
The Brits.
Whoever it was. The Brits are
Bojo.
The Americans, right? Whatever. The Brits are the Americans, right? So, like, the whatever they are, the AUKUS, the UKUS, the USUK, the Anglosphere, they scuttled it. But after they left Ukraine, the Ukrainian authorities were like, these guys need to stay in their lane. We don't care what a bunch of cannibals they like. There was all this kind of racial stuff, and it's sort of like, whatever, like, we're brown, we're gonna have racial stuff said about us, but it's also like, I'm not gonna go and do work and put stuff out there to try to help a situation where nobody wants my help. Nobody wants my analysis. Nobody wants my thoughts. Nobody wants my research. Nobody wants anything. I have nothing to offer.
I don't think that's true, though. I honestly don't think that's true. And I know you're not. This is not false humility on your part.
No,
I don't think you're being humble.
I'm not fishing. I'm not fishing.
No, I know, but that's the thing. Like, this is what I'm realizing, and like so the whole thing about actually what you said earlier. I want to go back to that about our opinion. It's not. It's kind of identitarian. Like, we don't have.
It's identitarian.
We don't have a horse in this race, and it's not my place to sit there and tell Ukrainian nationalists that they're fascists, or I'm not going to say
that's
that.
right too.
It's not for me. It's not for me. Like, but that's the thing. Where do you draw the line? Like, when do you step in? Are we going to be liberal? Because I hate
no,
because that's what the diasporoid brain regime changer uses. They're like, oh, let Iranians speak, just far right Zionist ones. Like, that's the typical don't speak over people X, and like that's the liberal thing. And I swear though that like I have internalized that to a point that like Yeah, I won't share my views on what's going on in Ukraine, even though I follow it a ton. I
Yeah,
totally
yeah.
follow it a ton because it's a
Like the
hugely
level of
important.
detail, the level of detail that I know, Sina, like the weapon systems, the
Yeah.
tactics,
Okay.
the
This is another
like
question.
it's
This is a
just
new this is another question.
yeah,
Information, we have never been so
yeah, yeah, yeah,
blessed with
yeah,
information. Information
yeah,
is so free flowing
yeah,
that it can go everywhere. Now, at the same time, we've never been more censored in a sense
yeah,
because the streams, the so-called streams, the mainstreams of media are so incredibly controlled, but
yeah,
they also don't have, but in their power, in their, like, their weakness, their strength is their weakness in terms of their ability to
yeah,
control. Like, they control so many different media sources and they made them all so homogeneous that
yeah,
weirdos like us found ourselves in the situation of having thousands of listeners or followers, if
yeah.
only because they do such a poor job covering anything but whatever is in the news cycle. Like, their own enslavement to the news is their weakness, and that's why we can have careers.
Or they're willing to spend credibility creating trying to create scandals out of nothing, which the China panic is, right? Like they used all wall to wall media coverage in Canada to be like, China's influencing Canadian
God,
elections.
yeah.
There's Chinese secret police stations, whatever, anything. Chinese scientists are stealing Canadian secrets, like across the board. And it's just like, I don't know. I don't. Part of the article. Apparently, some of the articles. I haven't gotten too deep into this, but apparently, there's complaints in the mainstream media that Canadians just can't seem to get Canadians excited about this. Like
Yeah.
they're just like, I don't know why, but Canadians don't seem to care very much about Chinese influence. Like, and so when you're saturating media with a story that nobody cares much about, you create niches for other things for sure.
Well, there's a couple of problems that we've been kind of playing around with, and they're all enmeshed in this. One is coverage, right? Academics love
Yeah,
this word, coverage.
yeah,
When I was looking for academic jobs, this was also a word that you would hear is like, oh, can he
right.
cover this field? What's your
Yeah,
coverage?
yeah.
Right?
Did he
Which is a
teach
fair
courses?
question, right? Because
Yeah,
academics live in this world called fields and they
yeah,
need to cover them, and that's the
yeah,
job. And you're a butcher, you need sausage. Like,
yeah,
that's what you do. But however, there's another thing underneath that, which is the curation of that coverage, and
yeah,
that's the political thing underlying that, and who gets to get covered and what degree. So, like, there is a vast overrepresentation of, say, Iran
yeah,
in all kinds of news, cultural, academic spaces. Vast in
yeah.
terms of overrepresentation, in terms of like the scale of our country, the number of people,
Right.
but it's because of the importance of information around Iran that
Of
importance is not neutral
disinformation around
exactly, right?
Iran.
Like, and that diaspora thing of, oh, there are so many grifters and
Yeah,
charlatans and just regular scum people hide behind that so much, and they use their identity as their credentials,
yeah.
such that I've come to the conclusion that specializing in a country, you are like, if you're specializing in one country out of
No,
a
it's
hundred thousand,
yeah.
like on this world or whatever, 200,
It's suspicious.
whatever,
It's
you're
suspicious to me.
suspicious. Yes,
It's
yeah.
suspicious to me.
You're
Like when
part
I
of the
meet
problem.
somebody,
Yeah.
when I meet somebody who's just like a Venezuelanist, it's like, why though? Like, why?
Yeah.
Why did you?
Because the
You know,
problems of
even if
Venezuela
you're
are
right.
not related to, are not solely inclined, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's where the sort of like machinations and the kind of like, I want to say kind of like intellectual hegemony of the academy and like 19th century German universities have really played out, and that they divided the world into different fields and
Yeah,
different
yeah.
regions, and imperialists, like the imperialist mind, divided
Yeah.
the world up and said, okay,
Yeah.
this is that, and we're going to get all this information and coverage to hold that places. And this is like a key thing of Orientalism, right? Like the
Right.
machine of Orientalism
then-
is about
but-
holding the world in your brain.
But then there's like a tradition that we're kind of a part of like very worldly, usually Western Marxists, right? And Ben is like this, and like people like Brian Becker, right? Do you follow Brian Becker? He has a YouTube channel. He's also one of these guys. He's like the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and he has this channel, and he just like talks about everything everywhere in the world, like, or Eugene Puryear and Rania Khalek, their show, like, but like going back a generation, there's like all these people, like the guy who went to Egypt. There's a really good book, right, called The Ruin of Egypt or something. What's that guy's name? But Egypt's Ruin. Let me just look it up. The guy's name was, oh come on, it was really good. We used it a lot in our episode on this. Egypt's Ruin: A Financial and Administrative
Fedor
Record.
Anaronovich Roshtin.
Yeah, Rothstein. Yeah. Like you'll get these guys, and they're like social. They're some kind of socialist, and they like, you know, they'll get hooked on one place, but they also kind of follow every country. You know, I remember like reading, but people from the 80s who went to Afghanistan, like, and were very pro-communist in Afghanistan. So there's like it's almost like a flip side of this, right? Where it's not exactly Orientalist. It's not exactly like people from the regions, but it's this kind of socialistic or anti-imperialist, like people who travel the world and write about like the cause of liberation everywhere, right? And that can be kind of Orientalist too. And that's like, it's almost like a question of like, this is where, or Vijay Prashad, right, is another example of this. It's like, and it can be Orientalist, but like what we are always trying to do is differentiate ourselves from Orientalists, right? We're always trying to be like, no, they do this, and we're truly internationalist. You know, we're not area studies people, but we are better at area studies than area studies people. We're not political scientists, but we're better at analyzing politics than those people. And we're always on the side.
Well, most people are, to be fair.
Yeah, right. We're not journalists, but we use those methods, right? We report, we talk to people, we have integrity, we show our sources, we show our work.
I mean, because the things you're saying though is that what you're saying is that like we've also done this thing. Our brains have been trained by modernity, by late capitalism, kind of also, in the sense that these skills, identities you have as like a job. These are different, fundamentally different sciences or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But like I don't like what an economist does is not that much different than what like a literary studies person does. It's textual analysis, it's criticism, it's reading, it's argumentation, it's literature review.
When I do economics, I say this economic event happened, and then this next economic event happened, and I just go through the chronology, right? I mean, yeah.
So like this, like the fundamentally is that like the base of all this is the task of reading and criticism. Right? Like the critical. So what you and I try to do in our shows is to kind of like translate our academic training into discussions of parts of the world or regions of the world or conflicts that otherwise get sort of like, erased in our otherwise like very boring. Now, mind you, most of the world is erased 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in our news sphere, right? Unless it's some active threat like PSYOP story. Like this is like what did people expect by letting all these corporations buy every single media? Like what did we expect by like 4 companies owning every single content source? Right? Like, they're going to create this echo chamber of mediocrity that's mostly just there to sell you stuff that farms its mostly content to the internet and says, okay, 24-year-old intern from Ivy League school, can you write the news for the day?
Chat GPT.
Oh yeah, that's the next evolution. But I mean, look, we need to thank those institutions, because those institutions keep us employed. Because if they had anti-imperialists on MSNBC, they would take time away from us. Like,
but that's what every once in a while, that's what they do, right? They'll be like, they'll hire some tokens.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while. But they would hire you.
Since the 2010s, there hasn't been any. There's been a mass conglomeration and just an expulsion of voices that aren't center-right imperialist voices of all stripes. And what's interesting is that they've diversified, capital D, trademark, they've diversified the industry such that like every psychotic right-wing frothing at the mouth, like ISIS supporting, like whatever, Sunni Arab, sorry to bug on Sunnis, but it's just something, or have like, are they're now like in some sort of like news organization and they get platformed and they have 60,000 like Twitter followers and they have like a blue check mark. Now, I'm going to be the guy who initially takes that. So the meaning of that, now this is like the next level of the conversation. Like the meaning of all those things, like the difference between you and me and you and those people who work for, say, let's say Newslines, the fakest of them all. Like the difference between that, like, it's, you know, they like what they do and what we do, like we occupy the same cesspool, let's say, right?
Sure.
Like what we do is hopefully different. I'd like to think it's different. We're not as like ideologically driven. I mean, maybe we are. I mean, who am I fooling? But like ultimately, I'd like to think that the difference between me and a scumbag regime changer isn't just the kind of isn't just like an ideological thing. It's not that we have different political worldviews, but it's I hope that it's reflected in the content of my show. And one thing that I refuse to do is specialize in anything, right? That like the generalist nature of my show, even if it's kind of regional, you can say that about my show, is that like the show's topics change. And I try to keep a kind of more holistic, and that ensures that I don't get trapped into this small professional cadre, which happens to so many like media projects and podcasts that drink from kind of like mainstream news and like the news cycle. Right. So like the same 30 people showing up. I mean, I don't know. I haven't listened in a while, but literally Chapo has one Middle East guy, Derek Davison. He's been on the show for like 10 years. That's how I remember. They would just have him back left and right. Sometimes they would have like a Middle Eastern person on and like would make stupid comments or whatever. But like that's the extent of their show. Of their like, because they don't give a shit. Like they don't care. Right. And like, I'm not going to begrudge the Chapo guys for not giving a shit. Like, I don't give a shit about a lot of the world. Right?
No, but they are specialists in like the electoral and domestic.
It's the narcissistic world of the media class that's like narcissistic in terms of their own provincialism guides and like cements so much of their analysis. So like the small media world that they were born from. I'm saying the Chapo guys, like watching the News Hour or some shit.
Right.
Like that's that. There's a reason why that they've come out of that. Whereas you and I, we were exposed to like different media sources, not just like linguistic, not just like in terms of political orientation, but linguistically and culturally. Like we have other languages and we have other worldviews and other trainings. And you spent a lot of time in Latin America and.
But their audience is huge, right? Like if you're American, they're much more interested in the domestic politics of that world, and it's just like that's just not it. You know, there was a long time when I was like, oh, I can't do that as well as other people or whatever. But like the fact is, it's also just not that interesting to me. Like it's so I couldn't. That's another reason I could never keep up. Like my eyes go glaze over when I start hearing about like Trump and Manafort and Blinken and Sullivan. Like I can't tell these people apart. I don't know what they look like. I don't know what they sound like. I don't, like it's just
you're numb to it, yeah.
And there's so many people covering, coverage. You got, full circle. There's just like I don't have. Again, it's like me talking about Russia Ukraine is like me talking about Democratic Party politics in the U.S. Like, who cares? Why would anyone care what I have to say about that?
But that's the thing. Yeah. I think that I don't think, and again, I don't think you're being humble or anything. I think you're wrong though, because people do want it. Like, if we did an episode on Russia Ukraine, which we should, by the way, we totally should. Why not? Why shouldn't we? If the fucking morons get to do it, why shouldn't we? Like, why do we have to I'm not talking about self-censorship. But why do we have to like be like if our listeners are here and there's like thousands of them between our two shows, like if our listeners are here for us, no one put a gun to their head. They're curious about what we have to say. So like, why not do what the normies do and just comment on everything? Like, what's wrong with
that? Just have our thoughts. Okay, well, let's wrap up because I gotta go. I gotta go pick up my kids.
Okay, we didn't get anywhere. I need more therapy.
Oh yeah, your time's up. You're 50. You're 50. Your 50 minutes. Your 50
Oh,
minutes
yeah,
is
that's
up.
true.
Yeah.
And in conclusion, maybe I should just get an actual therapist. Should I pay you for this? Technically, you're paying me for this.
Yeah, I am. I am paying you.
You're
I
a
don't
good
know,
man, Justin.
$2 or something.
$5. Oh, that's true. Yeah, one episode.
At the what level is it? Mohandas level?
I think you're.
I'm
I
not
think you're.
Mohandas level.
Oh, you think
I'm
you're
just a
Mohandas.
fella.
You're not
I'm
a fella. You're not
fella.
$1. You're $5.
Oh, okay. I'm a
Because you
Mohandas
got all
level.
of it. Thank you, Justin. Thank you for supporting my show. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for
Yes,
kind of helping
yes.
me through this existential crisis. I
All
think
of
we
the
should
above.
do a Ukraine-Russia episode. We'll do it for patrons only. The hardcore people will show up, and we can just go through Telegram. People like that stuff, Justin. We shouldn't be so fussy. We should just do whatever comes to
Well,
mind.
you
There's
know what I
no-
would do.
there's no
You know what I
difference.
would do. I would do a chronology.
Let's do it. Let's do Russia, Ukraine. Let's do it.
I'll think about it.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Bye.